Isn't that a beautiful song? Just absolutely stirs my heart. And I love that song since learning it several years ago. Couple of additional announcements as we get started this morning. First of all, Don Duffer's mom is with us. Sister O'Bara Graves is visiting with us today. Sister O'Bara is 91 years old today. And so we want to wish her a very happy birthday. I was privileged to be at her 80th birthday, at her 90th birthday, and I told her today I plan to be at her 100th birthday party. So I'm looking forward to that, Sister O'Bara. Secondly, I checked with Mike Smith. Mike and Bernice, as Stan mentioned, are in Florida. Once Bernice got down there, she got to feeling bad. She's been in the hospital now several days. She was originally scheduled to have an arteriogram yesterday. They now are going to do that later today. And so they've got to move her to the hospital that does those procedures. So please remember Mike and Bernice in your prayer. They don't know if it's heart-related, lung-related, or what it is that she's experiencing. And Mike, if y'all are watching via the internet, God bless you. We pray His richest blessings upon you at this time. Of course, our prayers continue to go out to the Quillen family in the loss of their brother Ronnie this past week. Memorial service was held yesterday. Just a death before its time. Ronnie was just shy of his 51st birthday. So please continue to remember Pam and Robert and Donnie and all of their family, nieces and nephews in your prayers as well. We've been doing a series of lessons called Restoring Our Relationship with Self, part of our R4 ministry. Stan's mentioned a lot of what's going on in our R4 ministry as we try to reach out into our community. And a lot of activities coming up. In fact, if you look at our schedule in the calendar, it's almost like every weekend there's something big coming up. You'll see in my article today, don't read it during the sermon, please, but if you'll please notice it later on, there's a reference to this special contribution coming up in March. As I said in that particular article, this contribution is not about paying the past, it's about preparing the future. And I hope we'll be praying about that. There's also a request in there for teachers. One of the things we're trying to do is to revamp our children's educational program to get more people volunteered and involved in that. And if you're willing to do that, there are contacts in there that you can make, and we would appreciate your help very, very much. Today's lesson is one that Leslie Chapman needs desperately. So I'm going to be preaching to me today. If you get caught in the fallout, then perhaps you need it as well. But I'm stomping on my toes today. We've been looking for several weeks at the concept of what it means to be fruitful in the kingdom of God. What has God called us to do? And I want to look at some verses that we've looked at just in review and ask that you just notice what takes the preeminence in each of these verses. The first one comes out of Romans chapter 5, where the apostle says, "And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love." Notice the language there. God's agape. God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Paul is saying here that God has demonstrated His love to us. He has poured it out. He has immersed us in it. God is wanting us to be aware of just how much He loves us. John would put it as simple as, we all love the text, John 3:16, "For God so loved that He gave His only Son." God has poured out His love. And so I want to begin with that realization as we move further into our lesson this morning. Without a realization of what God has done for you, you will not be able to act on the challenge that God has given to you. Now, some other text John 13, which will kind of become the heart of John 15, where Jesus talks about He being the vine, we being the branches, how we need to remain in Him. As he goes down in that text, he says, what does it mean to remain in Him? It means to remain in His love. Again, going back to Romans 5:5. Recognizing how much He loves us and what He's done for us. And as a result of that, He says, a new commandment I give you, love one another, as I have loved you. There is that remain in my love. There is that love of God that's been poured in our heart. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And then, of course, that leads us to texts that we studied over the last couple of weeks. The fruit of the Spirit. Paul, as he launches into that in the book of Galatians, begins with the most important. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. Or if you go over to Peter, as he talks about the Christian graces, he reverses the process. And as he's getting down to the end, he's getting to the most important. And notice, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith. And then he goes through the various Christian graces there, ending with, and to mutual love, or mutual affection, or brotherly love, add agape love. Galatians 5:6, just a little bit earlier in Paul's list. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts, I mean, when Paul says that, we probably need to listen. The only thing that counts is faith, but it's faith that expresses itself how? Through love. Again, the importance of love there. Or if you go over to Peter, as Peter was talking about the Christian graces in his second book, in his first book he says, above all. Again, kind of like Paul, above all. Here's something that's very important. Love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And so one of the things that you see coming over and over again is this realization that because God has loved us, we then can and ought to love both one another and others as well. Now, love, the central nature of God Himself. And by the way, we could have looked at just other verses, just all the way from Matthew to Revelation, all of which emphasize this role of God's amazing love for us and our response to that love. Okay, love's important. But then you have passages like this one, where Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies. And I still remember as a youth minister talking to a group of teenagers and bringing up this particular verse and them saying, I can't do that. I can't love my enemies. I remember asking in a devotional one night, if someone hits you on one side of the face, what are you supposed to do in response to it? And the young man said, you're supposed to turn and let him hit the other side. And I was so thrilled to hear this 15-year-old teenage boy say that. And then he said, and then Daddy told me to deck him. And I'm like, I think we missed something in that process. Love enemies. Sometimes it's hard just to love my family. Sometimes it's hard to love brothers and sisters in Christ. And boy, strangers, I don't know about y'all, but loving strangers is tough for me. And then loving my enemies, learning how to pray for those who persecute me so that I can truly be, notice his language there, so that you can be the children of your Father in heaven. How do you do that? Now, if we're going to understand all of this teaching about love, we're going to have to clear up, first of all, an understanding about love. That's one of the problems we have. Many of you have heard this before, but I want to go back and re-emphasize it. Some of you maybe never have heard this. Our problem is that our word for love is simply too broad. You know, we use the word for love. I mean, all over the place. People are like, Leslie, who do you hope wins the Super Bowl? Listen, I'm from Mississippi. Archie Manning was the first football player to put Mississippi on the map. Anybody that's got the last name Manning, if you're from Mississippi, you love them. Right, Chad? Chad and Jennifer, they're from Mississippi. They'll back that up. You go for the Manning family. And so if somebody says, Leslie, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? I love Peyton Manning. But Carolina's probably going to win. That's the reality of it. But we use love for things like football and sports. We use love for favorite dishes. We use love for our spouses and our children. We use love for our friends. We use love for our country. I mean, that word is so broad, we can use it for just about anything. Fortunately, the Greeks were a little bit more specialized than we were, and so they had specific words that they would use to describe different types of love, because the reality is all of these expressions I've been using are different types of love. First word that the Greeks would use is a word called storge. And the easiest way to remember this, if you've got a handout and you're filling it in, the easiest way to remember the word storge is that storge is family love. It is the love that I have for Kyle, for Robert, for my mom, for my brother, my sister, my aunts, my uncles. Not my wife. Yeah, I've got. Sometimes you think, well, it's for your wife. The only way to have storge love for your wife is to marry your cousin. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. Sorry, Amanda. I am from Mississippi. And let me say that my great-grandparents actually did. They were first cousins, but I don't recommend that. Storge love is blood love. It's natural love. It's love that is there the moment you're born. You don't have to teach it to a father. You don't have to teach it to a mother. It's a love that you realize that even though your brother or sister may not behave the way they should, you love them no matter what, or if you don't behave the way you should, they love you. Paul would see a time coming up where he would say, well, I mean, even in his day, that some of the Gentiles, however, did not have that natural love. It's a natural love. I like the way God's Word's translation put it. Notice this. They don't have any sense, they don't keep promises, and they don't show love to their own families. They don't have the ability to love their own brother or sister or mother and father or children or grandchildren. But the love I have for my brother or my sister or my mother is storge love. If I were to get a call right now, if somebody were to come in and say, Leslie, your mother needs you, I would simply say, Stan, you're going to have to finish the lesson. My mother needs me. That's storge love. And it's very natural. Again, sin can be so damaging that it can affect it. But in general, it's a love that's very natural for us to have. The second is eros. Now, Amanda, here's where the husband and wife starts, is eros. Eros is romantic love. It's not used in the New Testament, but it is used in the Septuagint of the Old Testament in texts like Esther chapter 2. Now the king, you go back to the book of Esther and you have that story of the Persian king and how he had deposed his wife Vashti, and he, word went out that he wanted a new queen. Now the king loved Esther more than all the other women and favored her over all the other virgins. Eros is that love that develops when you're a teenager. It is when all of those chemicals in the body starts kicking in. When I was 9, 10 years old, if you had said to me, Leslie, do you like girls? I'd go, why in the world would I like girls? They're yucky. But somewhere around the 4th, 5th, 6th grade, God reached down in Leslie Chapman and turned on a switch. And all at once, all of those people that had been so ugly had all at once become beautiful, and all that time I wanted to spend with my boyfriends, I decided would be better spent with a girlfriend, right? And of course it's true the other sex going the other way as well. Eros is a lot about hormones, it's a lot about pheromones, it's about chemistry. We even talk about the chemistry was right between them. And unfortunately, it is related a lot to things like hormones and pheromones and other things that we don't fully understand physically. But we meet someone, we're attracted to them, we fall in love with them. And then sometimes we fall out of love with them. People say, Leslie, can you fall out of love with someone? Romantically, yes. You can get to the point of where you're no longer attracted to them like you used to be. Now, can you reestablish that attraction? I believe that you can sometime. But it's a very different type of love. The third is philia. And philia is a word we're very familiar with our city, Philadelphia. It's used, in fact, that very word is used in the New Testament. Philia has to do with friendship. And it has to do with those people that you meet in life that you have commonality with, and because of that commonality, you develop a bond that is, to use the word of Proverbs, is tighter than the bond of natural love, storge, sometimes. And so you meet people who are very common as far as they have a common interest and a common likeness. They're not usually opposites of you. Most of us don't have good friends who are diametrically the opposite of us. Our friends are usually people who are very similar to us. As many of you know, I sometimes use Phil over here as an illustration. Phil and I were roommates in college. We were roommates in college because we had so much in common. I mean, first of all, we were both 5'6", okay? I mean, we were the same height. Not only that, but we were both raised in churches of Christ. We were both Bible majors. We were both at the time taking Greek. We sounded alike. I want to tell you, Phil and I sounded so much alike on the telephone that one time Phil was talking to a girl there on campus, and he said, Leslie, put the hand over the phone. He said, I need to go do something right fast. Can you just fill in for a little while? And I said, sure. He handed me the phone. I continued the conversation. He came back, picked up the phone. The girl never knew she had talking to two different people. Now, people say, y'all don't sound that much alike. Listen, I've called before and had people to say, Phil, I told you not to call me anymore. And I'm like, I'm not Phil. I'm Leslie, okay? So friends have a lot in common. And because of that, you develop a bond. That's a bond called friendship love. Now, let me say a word about marriage. Marriage begins oftentimes with romantic love, but it needs to have this friendship love to kick in. And oftentimes when I'm doing premarital counseling, I'm looking for those things that the couple has in common, because I know that the eros may at some point in time fade away or become less important, and that philia needs to take its place. But friendship love is so very, very important. That's the word that's used there in 2 Peter in that list of Christian graces. The NIV used to translate it brotherly love. Now they translate it mutual affection, but it has to do with friends. And then agape. Agape is the word that's used in all of these passages we've looked at this morning. To love one another as Christ loved us is to practice agape. Agape is not natural. It's very important to realize it's not natural. Number two, agape is not about chemistry. That's not going on with agape. It's not about romance at all. Agape is not even about commonality and friendship. There may be some of that there, but that's not what it's about. Agape is about God. Agape is about seeing through God's lenses, realizing what God has done for us, and then us responding in kind toward those that God has called us to love, which of course is everyone. And when you boil it down to, agape is more about this right here than anything else. It is a decision of the will. It is about making a decision to care, even when you may not feel like caring, even though that person may be as different as the world to you. You choose to practice agape because God chose to practice agape toward you. Now, it's very important that you see that, because here's the problem. Leslie Chapman can practice the first three naturally. I mean, You didn't have to have someone saying to me on my 15th date, Leslie, it's okay now to kiss June. You didn't have to have anybody tell me that. I mean, the first time I went out with her, I wanted to kiss her. And it wasn't the 15th date. It was like 25th or something. But anyway, it was one of those of where when I finally said to June, can I kiss you? She said, what have you been waiting on? And I'm like, okay. You didn't have to teach me that. You didn't have to teach me to love my mother or my brothers and my sister. You didn't have to do that. And you don't have to teach people how to love their friends. Those are all natural. This is a different animal. Because I want to tell you, agape love is unnatural. Agape love is where we try to replace in our hearts the image of God that Satan's been working so hard to destroy. And it demands that we make a decision when everything in us is trying to tell us to go the other direction. It's why agape love is so important in all of our relationships. I'll take one as an example, which is marriage. Agape love can overcome when the romance cools. Agape love can fill in when the friendship struggles. Agape love can make you make the right decision when that last child leaves home and you're sitting at the dinner table looking across the table at someone that you once knew, but now you're just not sure you know them anymore. Agape love can make you make the decision, I'm going to do what's right, not what I feel is right. That's why Jesus, of course, gives it as the new commandment. That's the word agape there. And it's why Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 pauses in the midst of a huge letter about struggles that the Corinthian church was going through and says, can I tell you what you all should be striving for? And he launches into this description of agape love. And you have a description that's there which basically says when Christians choose to practice agape, they're going to practice these characteristics. And all I've got here is some blanks that represent what Paul says agape love looks like. You've got 7 of them that are positive, 3 on the left, 4 on the right. And then you got 8 that are all in the negative. In other words, Paul says, let me kind of tell you what agape doesn't do. And so I want to run just through these just for a second. But here's what I want to ask you to do. Ask yourself this question. Who is it that I need to decide to act this way toward? Who is it? For instance, first of all, agape love is patient. When you decide to practice this love, you're going to be patient with people. And let me tell you the easiest example of this. You're going to be patient with that person in front of you who is looking down at their cell phone and the light's been green for 5 seconds. All right? I know you just want to put it in drive and just push them out of the way, but agape love says you're not going to do that. You're going to want to pull up beside them, roll down your window and say, what are you doing? But agape love says you don't do that. That you learn, and yeah, of course, it gets serious when it gets to our relationships with our friends, families, and with those that we need to shine the precious light of Jesus Christ upon. Be kind. And let me just say, who should we be kind toward? Everybody. If somebody videotaped the way you behave toward people you interact with in society, what words would someone watching that video, what words would they use to describe your behavior? Would it be kindness? Then he goes into the negatives. He says, agape love doesn't envy. I don't look at Reed and the fact that he's lost all that weight and go, I wished it was me instead of him. I need to work on it, Reed. I told you I need to work on it. All right? Doesn't look at other people's houses and cars and spouses and anything else that you may envy and say, boy, I wish that. Agape love doesn't do that. Next negative one on the list there, and Miss Jean, I believe I just locked it up. Did I? Can you advance it? Okay, let's see if I can start it from there. There we go. Thank you, Miss Jean. The next one after envious, it doesn't boast. And the attitude is it doesn't talk about, look what I can do or look what I have as regards someone else. And of course that leads to it's not proud. It doesn't dishonor other people. And y'all, it doesn't take a long explanation to describe what dishonoring someone is all about. It's not self-seeking. It's not all about me, but it's about the other person that I love, and more importantly, it's about God. It's not easily angered. Wow. Boy, I wished I'd learned that one early in my life. I mean, it's not one that just at the drop of the hat, how dare you do that, or how dare you treat me that way, and all at once you raise your voice and you're ready to go to battle. Agape love is not easily angered, and the reason is because man's anger usually doesn't do the righteousness of God. Boy, here's a huge one. Keeps no records of wrongs. Those of us who are spouses, that's a tough one, ain't it? That's the one we want to dig up every time we have that anger that comes up. You take the not easily angered, no record of wrong, you practice both of those, you'd solve most marriage problems, wouldn't you? But digging up the past and not letting it stay buried does not delight in evil. Doesn't desire, I'm going to get them back, and whatever it takes, that's what I'm going to do. He'll play off of that, does not delight in evil over here by says it rejoices instead with truth. It just wants God's truth to be practiced. And then it ends with 4 positives that Leslie Chapman struggles with every single solitary one of them. He says the first thing agape love does is that it always protects. Always protects. Even those who I don't agree with. Even those who are out to get me. Even those who anger me so much. Agape love always protects. It always trusts. That is, it always seeks to give the benefit of the doubt to other people. And boy, I've learned that if we give the benefit of the doubt to other people, that oftentimes we discover that our initial judgment is not really accurate at all. It always hopes. Wow. Always hopes for the best for everybody you come in contact with. That God's will can be fulfilled in their life as God is trying to fulfill it in yours. And it hangs in to the bitter end. It always perseveres. Paul was so huge on this that Paul would get to the end of this chapter and he would say, can I just give you the 3 most important things of Christianity? Now abides faith, hope, and love. But if you want to know the one that reflects the character of God the most, it's love. I struggle to practice agape love because it's hard. It's work. It's constantly taking your emotions and putting them on the back burner and using the God-inspired will as a Christian to try to make the right decision. For years, I thought I was pretty good at agape. I preached on it as if maybe I'd already mastered it. The older I get, the more I realize, Leslie, you're just a drop in the bucket. God's trying to teach you a lot about loving other people. I always thought, well, I love my family. I love my friends. I love people I work with and live next door to and shop at, the store. I love a lot of people, yeah, but what about those people that you just kind of block out of your mind that you don't want to have to love? See, that's the challenge, is to be willing to love those that God's calling us to love. That makes us have to make a decision to love. That's the only way we really be the people God's called us to be. I don't know where you are in your relationship with God. And love is a journey. It's a journey. but I want to invite you to start the journey. It begins with faith. Faith is important. And the hope that God will fulfill the promises that He's made to you, which He will. And then to experience that love as you share in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection in an act called baptism is the ultimate act of love on His part for us. If you've never done that, if you've never said, I want to put my faith in Jesus and proclaim it to the world in baptism, why not do that even today, right now, as we stand and sing?
I was sinking deep in sin.